I say good afternoon, good friends? Anyone who comes here must be a good friend, because I think we all have the same kind of concerns and are eager to look at ways of addressing those concerns in the very, I want to say, honourable way in which CBC always does. See, I admire CBC enormously. We have the courage to actually look at the elephant in the room, to talk about those things that no one else would talk about, and in a spirit of real integrity, sensitivity and courage to address some of the most challenging issues of our day. So CBC, congratulations on convening this meeting this afternoon. Thank you, Olive, for bringing us all together. Thank you for giving me the privilege of sharing. It's a great delight to be sharing this with my long-standing hero, Bishop Michael Nazar Ali, for whom I have unbounded respect. So, Olive, over to you, and thank you for bringing us together. And we're going to formally open the proceedings. This is just my informal welcome.
Bless you. Well, hello. How fantastic to see you. Welcome to this CBC Symposium. And we are met together as a result of Caroline Cox allowing us to be here. So, Caroline, thank you that you have been such a great friend to CBC all down the years. As our Vice President and President. And yes, we honour you. And basically, our subject today is as a result of the work you have been doing on, as you say, a sensitive and difficult subject. Welcome to Bishop Michael Nazar Ali, another wonderful friend of CBC. Thank you. Thank you for being here, Bishop Michael. We're looking forward to welcoming Paul Diamond, who will be here at about 4 o'clock. He's on a case at the moment, and he will be coming in at about 4. And on DVD, we're going to welcome Canon Andrew White from Baghdad. And so we're going to have a great time together. And we're tackling a subject, or we're looking at a subject today together in a spirit of Christian humility. We are living in incredibly difficult times, and we have to recognise what's going on in our world, what's going on in our nation. And it's important before we start on a subject such as Islamist resurgence, Sharia and freedom, that's quite a mouthful, is to understand why we're doing it and against which backdrop we are doing it. And we do this every year at CBC. Caroline does it all the time in her work. Michael Nazar Ali does it all the time in his work. Paul Diamond does it all the time in his work. It's really to tackle those really difficult and contentious issues that are so much part of our life today. Freedom is a big word, and it has a huge connotation and many, many contexts. But when we're thinking about this country and why we're here today, isn't it wonderful to be in this room looking out then this mother of parliaments over the river, and how precious it is to have this privilege of being able to meet together in freedom, to be able to talk freely about our faith, to be able to talk freely about the issues that confront us in a very real way. First of all, I'd just like to think a little bit about our nation and its identity. Well, isn't it fantastic being in this room with these incredible pictures of the coronation of King George VI there, and we all know and love. We so love George VI, and we so love our present Queen Elizabeth. That's part of our national identity. But when we think of our identity, what do we think? What do we think of? We rightly point to our history, our language, our long and deep commitment to the rule of law, a fierce upholding of concepts of freedom, of religion, assembly, of speech, and not least and most importantly, our foundational roots in the Christian faith, out of which and upon which our entire society has developed. We have to acknowledge that. We must acknowledge that. But as we become more visibly diverse, as we take on board more dimensions of our history, more languages spoken in our schools, more complex discussions of equality before the law, one feature of our national life remains centrally significant. We treasure the fact that above the shrill debates of our public life, we seek to be free under God. This is a wonderful freedom. In the Gospel of John, it says, if the Son shall set you free, you shall be free indeed. Now, this is foundational. The whole concept of our law, of our systems, of our everything about our nation. Our founding fathers understood that Christ came not to do away with the law, but to fulfill it. They sought that we should live under the law, that we should be godly and quietly governed, as it says in the Anglican prayer book. Though when we think of the racket at PMQs, you wonder whether they have listened to this advice from the Anglican prayer book. I find it very amusing. I have friends all over the world, and I come from Southern Africa. And when people come for the first time to this country, and they hear parliamentary question time, with them all absolutely yelling at the top of their voices, it seems so absolutely crazy. And yet it isn't crazy, it's ordered. And the fact that we should have Her Majesty's loyal opposition, how fantastic is that? I've lived in countries where you lock up the opposition. You don't give the opposition a proper place, a very central place in the whole of the outworking of our democratic system. The prophet Micah put it this way: He has showed you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God? That is what we strive to do as Christian subjects of Britain. We have a system of government and a legal system that enables us to live, move, and have our being within the framework of democratic rule. Today we're thinking about systems and about justice, as well as injustice and cries for freedom. We hear the cry for freedom all over the world, do we not? From many countries around the Mediterranean, Tunisia, Egypt, Yemen, Syria, Libya. How it's all going to turn out remains to be seen. It's just an incredible time of extraordinary turmoil. We live in turbulent times, and we pray particularly today for the people of Syria, and we think of the thousands upon thousands who are being killed there. What are we going to do about it? What is anybody going to be able to do about it? How is it going to work out? We pray for justice. We pray for the suffering people in Iraq and elsewhere, and we're going to hear today from Canon Andrew White, who more than anybody that exemplifies what it is as a Christian to stand and stay in the place of trouble and to minister into that incredibly divided community. And what a mess after that occupation in Iran. So we're going to hear from him. But this is where we turn to our subject for today. You might say, why have we chosen to talk about Islamist resurgence, Sharia and freedom? Well, I can tell you the reason is here, the reason is there. And we are so honoured to have you, Baroness Cox. And we're so honoured to have you, Michael Nazir Ali. We're so honoured to have Paul Diamond when he comes and to hear from Andrew. And we want to walk out of here understanding a whole lot more than when we came in. Baroness Cox has down the years been a champion of the suffering and the persecuted with her organisation HEART, Humanitarian Aid and Relief. The erudite Bishop Nazir Ali, likewise, a champion for the suffering, a champion and an advocate for the oppressed, and a tireless upholder of religious freedom. And we honour you for that, Michael. Canon Andrew White, he is indefatigable in his love for the Iraqi people. What a man. What a man. He's an ill man, and he's held this post there in Baghdad all the way down the years, liaising all the time with the entire Muslim community around him. That's where he lives. And in the midst of all of this, Christians are being constantly persecuted. And when you talk to Andrew, hardly a week goes by without somebody from his congregation being killed. Yes, and so we are here to hear about that. And at CBC we have sought down the years at such a gathering as today to concentrate on the subject that is up there, important in challenging our nation and our world, Islamist resurgence, Sharia and freedom. So we start today with Baroness Cox's Private Members' Bill, which she has been pushing through. And you say, well, why did Baroness Cox choose to put up a Private Members' Bill on this particular subject, gender equality and Sharia? Well, she's going to tell us about that. And we're going to develop our themes from there. Baroness Cox has said in the past, our concern is for the law of this land and the people who are suffering, especially the women. Do Sharia courts in this country operate as a parallel legal system? Baroness Cox believes they do. She says there is a widespread concern that some tribunals applying Sharia are going well beyond their legal remit, and some Sharia court rulings are being misrepresented as having the force of UK law. And so when she was launching this bill, Arbitrations and Mediation Services Equality Bill, aimed at ensuring that the Sharia tribunals and courts operate within the law, it is not a whole solution, she says, but it seeks to tackle some of the more flagrant injustices by trying to ensure that Muslim women are protected from discrimination and intimidation, and that any attempts by individuals or organisations to establish a parallel legal jurisdiction are prosecuted as unlawful. So we're going to start here, and Bishop Michael, who is a very distinguished exponent of Islamic law, is going to speak to us about the context in which this comes up and onwards. And Andrew is going to talk about Baghdad, and Paul Darman is going to talk about the implications of a kind of the turbulence in our own society, not necessarily because of these things, but including them. So, Baroness, may I turn to you again and say thank you very much. Over to you.
Either I need that to come over here, or I change places with you. That'd be easier. Okay. I just change places.
Do you mean this?
No, it's my laptop.
Oh.
Yes. I don't have to set any of the connections. Are we still together? No, I think we've upset the connection.
That's fine. I can do this while you're...
Oh, thank you. You've done it once. Really good afternoon, everyone, by the way. And it's lovely to be here with you. And pictures speak louder than words, and sometimes text is easier to absorb if you can read it rather than my voice just prattling on. So I've got quite a lot of this on text, which will enable me to move fast. Can you help me get my PowerPoint? Thank you very much. I'm a technological Neanderthal. Thank you. It'll be the... is that it's on the PowerPoint? No, it's not the thing I want. I'm looking for the PowerPoint.
Okay.
I did download it. It's... that's
this one.
That looks familiar. Thank you.
Okay.
That looks hopeful from the beginning. I'm in the right place. I think we're in the right place at the right time. Well, as Oliver has introduced the subject eloquently as always, it is, I think, enormously important to look at the contemporary challenges to faith and freedom at home. But I also want very briefly, because it was also on the agenda, to look at two countries abroad which much need concern, awareness, and for those of us who are Christians, prayer at this time. I'm sorry those of you sitting there are going to get a crick in your neck. If you wanted, there's a spare seat round there and tables to sit on over there. But first of all, the challenges at home. The United Kingdom, I think we'd all agree, has a cherished tradition of a commitment to fundamental freedoms, such as those enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and they include equality of access to the law of the land, and we're also committed as a nation to try to eradicate gender-based discrimination. Now, the subject before us has been well laid out by Olive, so we're looking at particularly Sharia law, and that, of course, is the law which is embraced by Muslims. It's important just at the beginning to remind ourselves that the vast majority of the world's 1.2 billion Muslims, including those living in the UK, are law-abiding and often extremely hospitable people. Block of flats where I live, I have an Afghan family living above me, an Afghan family living next door, and they're very good and delightful neighbours. However, there is a growth of militant Islamists, and politically strategic Muslims who are working to achieve global domination by various means. And one has to give them credit. They are thinking tactically. They're thinking strategically. And on the whole, those of us who live in the comfort zones of the West are not responding tactically or strategically. In the Western, as we call them, and that obviously includes places like Australia, which is hardly in the West, liberal democracies, some are using the freedoms of democracy to achieve political change which will destroy the democracy and the freedoms which it enshrines. Can you hear in the back, by the way? Thank you. If you can't and you still want to, do let me know. If you can't and you don't want to, it doesn't really matter. And of course, the thing we're looking at this afternoon, the introduction of aspects of Sharia law into the United Kingdom. And we have seen in this country the growth of this quasi-legal system based on principles which are fundamentally incompatible with the tenets of liberal democracy, for which people have lived and died, and indeed are living and dying today. You won't be able to read the smaller text perhaps, but I'll read it in case you can't, and anyhow, it's just better, I think, to read and talk at the same time. It's now known there are over 85, we don't know exactly how many, Sharia courts operating in the United Kingdom. Now, many may operate within UK law, but there are increasing concerns that many others are acting as in an inherently discriminatory quasi-legal system, to such an extent that one Muslim woman has said, "I'm speaking as a British Muslim. I would like to say I feel terribly let down by the British state, with its schizophrenic response to the law, its own law, our own law, its abrogation of its responsibility, the safeguarding rights of Muslim women." What are examples of the gender discrimination under Sharia law? Fundamental tenets of Sharia law are inherently discriminatory. And just to repeat this very important point, many women in this country are suffering to such an extent they claim their plight is even worse than in the countries from which they came. It's worse in the way that Sharia law is impacting on them. It's worse in many cases in the intimidation imposed by their own local families and communities, which prevent them from seeking the redress to which they may be entitled if they were to turn to the provisions of the law of our land. And there is real intimidation out there. I shall come back to that in just a moment. But just some of those provisions in Sharia which are inherently discriminatory. Girls and women will only receive 1/2 of any legacy given to boys and men. There's an inequality in access to divorce. In the Sharia law, a husband can unilaterally divorce his wife, sometimes merely by declaring the divorce 3 times. The wife needn't even be there. But constraints apply to a wife who wishes to divorce her husband. She may have to obtain her husband's permission. She may have to apply to a Sharia council or court for a ruling. She may have to pay money for this, for which she may have to appeal to her husband, who may not want to give it to her. There are other examples where she may have to be required by her imam to get a marriage certificate, and I'll come back to that example in a moment. Polygamy. A Muslim man who divorces his wife, who's been married in an Islamic marriage, but not in a civil marriage, is entitled to marry again under Sharia law, permitted to have 4 wives. A divorced wife may not be married without conditions. Okay, I'll come back to a little bit of feeling to what this really means in practice with a couple of case studies. Custody of children. Children born to a woman who is divorced in an Islamic divorce are then, according to Sharia law, liable to be placed in the father's care from the age of 7. So some of these women may be just divorced like that, and they may lose the right to look after their children. They're left with nothing. And I asked a question in the House, actually it was quite a long time ago, I've been concerned about this issue for some time, and I asked the Minister what happens to a Muslim woman in this country who is divorced by her husband, which can happen so easily, and she may lose her children. What right does she have in this country to claim any redress for what has happened to her? And if she wasn't married in a civil marriage, she has nothing. She is totally vulnerable. Rape. In Islamic Sharia law, if a woman wants to bring a charge of alleged rape, well, so easy, isn't it? She's obliged to provide 4 independent male witnesses. I mean, Muslim male witnesses, yes, thank you. Even more stringent condition. I mean, it's derisory if it isn't so tragic and so heartbreaking. Domestic violence. Husband is allowed to beat his wife, subject to certain limitations, sanctioning domestic violence. And unequal witnesses. In any Sharia court, a woman's evidence is counted as half the value of a man's. It's quite interesting, I was debating on Women's Hour with Aina Khan, who is a very sophisticated, very accomplished and very confident lawyer And she's both qualified and practices in Western law and in Islamic law, and she works in this Sharia environment. In debating with on women's hour, it got quite sort of lively debate, as you can imagine, and she actually said, she let this out. Here she's a professional Western-style woman, dressed Western-style, looking extremely chic, much chicer than me, and very sort of intellectually formidable, but she actually let slip in the discussion. Well, of course, in a Sharia court, you need two women, because women tend to get confused. She said that on BBC Radio 4, on Women's Hour. So it shows how deep it must go into the psyche. Unregistered marriages, so many marriages which are not registered according to UK law, but are just the Islamic religious marriage, which leaves those women so vulnerable. Now, many women, this is a quotation now from, you can read the text, from a book by Warwick and Borton, Recognising the Unrecognised, and it deals with inter-country cases and Muslim marriages and divorces in Britain. I quote, "Many women in Muslim communities in Britain believe, and many who know better can benefit by failing to correct their error, that a marriage in a mosque or before imams in Britain constitutes a valid marriage. In the event of a dispute and an attempt to enforce their rights through the British courts, they are then shocked to discover that, unless married in one of the very few mosques registered as places for civil ceremony, they just are not validly married in the eyes of British law, but they don't know this." And another reference, this time from a very good paper in One Law for All, I quote, "Although Sharia councils are said to mediate in family marriage matters, they have a different understanding of the term mediation and fail to understand or distinguish between mediation and arbitration. Councils often call themselves courts, and the presiding imams are called judges. According to the British Sharia Council, for example, in changing times, this British Sharia Council fulfills the criteria for consultative processes. In regard to domestic problems, it works as a Sharia court. Their decisions are imposed and seen to be legal judgments." So if someone says to you, are they really working as courts? They are seen by the community working as courts, they're seen particularly by the women to be valid courts, and so they act and work as if they are de facto, if not by British terms, de jure. Intimidation. It's part of the picture. The reality is that for many Muslims, Sharia courts are in practice part of an institutionalised atmosphere of intimidation, backed by an ultimate sanction of a death threat. And just a couple of case studies. Well, the first is an aggregate. So many ladies I've spoken to, and this story can go through so many of their lives here in Britain. I've heard example after example of women so badly abused in domestic violence and beaten by their husbands, they've even been hospitalised. I was talking to one lady who'd been hospitalised. In hospital, her husband wouldn't give the hospital her passport. I think he was afraid that she might take it and escape. He just gave the passport details. And then they were so pressured by the community not to prosecute because it would bring shame on the family and on their community. So they can't seek help, professional help, in this country. When they go to the Sharia courts or Sharia councils, they're then so often told by their imams to give their abusive husbands, is a chair here, excuse me, there's a chair for me. They're told again and again to give their abusive husbands another chance. And of course the violence is repeated and repeated. I was speaking to one lovely young lady, and she described the horrendous kind of abuse. She described how she'd gone to hospital. The community prevented her from seeking help from the official channels, so she was not allowed to prosecute or to take her case for any kind of help or assistance. Her husband then went off and got married to another wife. She was left then as a divorcee in Islamic terms, and she, a little way down the line, quite wanted to get a life of her own. So she went to the imam to try to get an Islamic divorce. He said to her, "No, I can't give you your marriage certificate." So she asked her husband, in Islamic terms, her ex-husband, if she could have the marriage certificate. He said, "No, it's back in our country of origin." Now they're so terrified, I can't even tell you the country of origin, in case the story gets out and you get to know. But back in the country of origin, her family went to his family to ask for the marriage certificate, and they beat up her younger brother because she had brought shame on the family by seeking a divorce for her husband, who'd already divorced her. So they wouldn't give the marriage certificate. So she went back to her imam, and the imam said, "Sorry, no marriage without marriage certificate." 7 years down the line, that lovely young lady is still looking for a life. And she has to live in a refuge because she's afraid of more abuse and violence from her abusive husband. That's one story. I could tell you so many more. Another example of permission. This is in Britain. A widow in her 50s, widowed, wanted to remarry, went to the Sharia court, council, was required by the Imam to obtain permission from a male relative. But he hadn't got a male relative in this country. She was a widow, her family not in this country. So my only male relative, I know where they are, is my 7-year-old grandson in Jordan. So this 50-year-old widow had to go to her 7-year-old grandson in Jordan to get permission to marry him. She showed me the sort of childish handwriting in Arabic in which he'd given her permission to marry. How humiliating. And that's in Britain today. So, a little concerned by this, I thought something must be done. Now, there are good organisations out there. There's ICRO, the Iranian Kurdish Women's Rights Organisation, who work with a lot of these women who suffer, and I've spoken at their conferences, and I've worked with the women whom they have to speak about their plight. There's One Law for All. There are active organisations and campaigning organisations out there, Muslim ones, Muslims for Secular Democracy. But no amount of campaigning, lectures, papers, demonstrations will actually bring change. This is the place to bring change. And I thought I couldn't sit on the red benches in this place and just be silent about what I knew was going on out there. On two aspects. One, the complete violation of our tradition of liberal democracy, having a parallel legal system which is incompatible, and secondly, the gender discrimination, where women are really suffering in this country. And I can't afford to turn a blind eye to their suffering. So the bill had a first reading last June, and just some of the things it would do, it can't deal with everything, but it would create a new duty on public authorities to inform women of the legal disadvantages of not being in a legally recognised marriage, so at least they'll have knowledge. Secondly, it would make gender discrimination an irregularity in arbitration proceedings, so it's easier for a decision to be set aside by a court. At the moment, if you go to arbitration with full consent, you go through to a contract, that is legally binding. But now, if it was made on Sharia principles, and the woman later realised that, and realised that she wasn't happy with that inequality and discrimination, then she could ask for that contract to be reopened and reconsidered. Very important, you would provide more protection for victims of domestic violence by making clear that a victim of domestic abuse is a witness to the offence and therefore is able to receive protection without having to ask for it. So the onus is not on the woman to seek help, but healthcare professionals or social workers could actually bring the help to her, so she would be relieved of the burden of intimidation on the community, preventing her from seeking help. And it would create a new offence, including maximum 5-year prison sentence for anyone who acted in a pseudo-judicial capacity. I'm happy to say the bill is widely supported by a coalition, including church leaders, and I'm thrilled that Bishop Michael Nazir Ali has been with us from the very beginning. The National Secular Society is a good broad base of support, both ends of the spectrum of religious belief and lack of it. One Law for All, various Muslim groups and human rights groups working with women affected by Sharia-based discrimination in the UK. Just very briefly, other challenges in the UK, and I'll just touch on these very briefly. Freedom of speech. You might remember some years back there was incitement to religious hatred legislation when it would have been a criminal offence, punishable up to 7 years in prison, to say anything critical of Islam, to say anything positive about Christianity, to proselytise in case that gave offence, and to make jokes about Islam. Well, we mobilised the black churches, and we had amendments in this house, and black churches all came and demonstrated, you might remember, and they sang Amazing Grace outside. It was wonderful. You could hear it inside Parliament. And there were amendments, I call them the Freedom Amendments, were put on in the House of Lords. Tony Blair, as the then PM, was determined, under pressure of the Muslim Council of Britain, I suspect, to reduce those House of Lords, to remove those House of Lords Freedom Amendments. And the critical day came when the votes were going to be taken to remove those Freedom Amendments. All the black churches came and demonstrated again. They lobbied MPs. They changed the minds of 9 Labour MPs. And that day our freedom hung on a thread. The first vote to remove those House of Lords Freedom Amendments was lost by 10 votes. The second was lost by 1 vote. So close are we to the loss of a fundamental freedom of speech. And this is now coming back at United Nations level. And the battle for the mind, universities, so many universities are now influenced by appointments and by buildings funded by Saudi Arabia and other Islamic charities, inverted commas. Even, for example, in Lampeter University, the kind of Welsh Oxbridge, you go to their theology department, go to the Centre for Islamic Studies, the first thing you see is a great brass plaque thank you to Sheikh so-and-so and so-and-so for supporting this. Is there going to be any really open critical discussion of Islam in a theological college which is funded by Sheikh so-and-so and so-and-so? And how balanced will be discussions on Palestine and Israel? Very good book published by what was then the Centre for Social Cohesion with a clever title, Degrees of Influence. It's worth getting if we're concerned about academic freedom. And then there's a lot of work. You may have seen the Dispatches programme, the undercover programme on the Islamic school, the madrasa, the funding of faith schools and the teaching that goes on in those schools, rabidly anti-Semitic, anti-Western, much of it anti-Christian, anti-other faiths, and very, very inflammatory. So battles for the mind. So what do we do on the home front? I think the time has come when we must draw a line in the sand, where necessary, to protect those fundamental freedoms and the vulnerable citizens, and to ensure we pass on our heritage undiminished to our children. And very, very briefly for your prayers, please, Sudan. Sudan suffered military jihad. It's all part of the bigger picture, with an Islamist regime in Khartoum declaring war against the south. 2 million died, 4 million were displaced. The new Republic of Sudan, following the peace agreement, was able to get its independence. But in the north, it's now called Sudan, al-Bashir has declared his commitment to the establishment of a unified Arabic Islamic state. And the fate of the churches and Christians in the Republic of Sudan is extremely dire. Just very briefly, during the war, I went there 30 times, scorched earth, carnage, genocide in the war. That was all that remains of his church. And President Omar Bashir's determination to make the Republic of Sudan into an Islamic state. Now bombing his own people in the Nuba Mountains and in Blue Nile. Over 300,000. This is bigger than Libya. The scale of suffering, bigger in scale than actually Syria. You don't get it on the news, it's almost a news backup. That's why George Clooney actually went to try to get some media coverage, because the American government, the British government, were not taking this seriously. Over 300,000 have had to flee their homes from Nuba Mountains, the aerial bombardment, hiding in caves, deadly snakes in those caves, but they're more afraid of the bombs than they are of the snakes. Still smile. But the casualties are taking place today, the killing of children today in Sudan. The refugees dying. I was there just a few weeks ago, fled from Abyei in the camps, and Khartoum in Blue Nile, over 80,000. And South Sudan itself, I was there for the birth of the new nation, such joy but such suffering. Humanitarian crises, it made us smile, a lovely smile, but leprosy. What a privilege to hold her hand. And we have to think beyond this. We have to think of our country today, first and foremost, but we must see it as part of the larger picture. We can't forget the jihad being fought elsewhere, and our little motto from Heart, from St. Francis, pity weeps and turns away, compassion weeps and puts out a hand to help. Could have put out that hand to help the Muslim women in this country, the people suffering in Sudan, and briefly Nigeria. Sunday before last, and 2 Sundays before that, churches bombed in Jos. I don't know how many of you knew that. Suicide attacks in Jos. So many martyrs already this year. This is Dogonahama 18 months ago. 450 Christians killed in one night in this village. But there's still worship in the ruins. This is a church in Jos on a Tuesday afternoon, ruined to the nth degree, but having a Bible study and singing and worshipping. The University Church in Jos. Bauchi State, church destroyed, the mosque standing, but they'll worship. To God be the glory. Last year, the Anglican Bishop of Bauchi, one of his Anglican churches, so many destroyed. Invitation of youth event that was never going to occur because of jihad. And Archbishop Ben, who suffered so much with his wife Gloria. And as I finish, challenged us. He said last year, if we have a faith worth living for, it is a faith worth dying for. Don't you, that's us, compromise the faith we are living and dying for. My friends, by allowing Sharia law in this country, without saying anything about it or putting in any kind of conditions to try and bring about some kind of insurance of freedom and protection for vulnerable people, we are compromising the faith they are living and dying for. And his final challenge, if you don't resist now, your grandchildren are going to have to fight the battles. You did not have the courage. That's why I'm trying to introduce this private members' bill, because I think it's really important we have informed, sensitive, responsible discussion here in Parliament. Otherwise, I'm afraid there's going to be a polarisation in the country. People are increasingly worried about what's going on out there in Luton, in Birmingham, in Bradford, here in London, and elsewhere. And people say to me, should I vote BNP because no one is doing anything about it? And I say, well, no, please don't. But there will be a move in that direction, because if Parliament and politicians are not seen to be doing something, people are getting desperate and will join the EDL or the BNP. And at the other side of the spectrum, the Muslims here, the strategic Muslims, will have a green light to go on introducing their very, very conservative, anti-democratic, anti-women Sharia law and all the threat it is to our freedoms in this country. It'll give them the green light because they can do it with impunity. So we must. Now, a little motto in my own little charity, Heart: I cannot do everything, I must not do nothing. And friends, together, we cannot do everything, but we must not do nothing. And if together we all do something, we really can make a difference to protect the precious heritage of freedom in this land, and we can do something to help protect our brothers and sisters who are dying for our faith in other parts of the world today. And we'll be hearing from Canon Andrew White. But because Sudan and Nigeria, you can't get all on the BBC, I just wanted to highlight them this afternoon, because they much need your prayers in those countries. So thank you for letting me share a little bit the pain and the passion. Just trying to do something. Thank you. No, I'm chairing, aren't I? Yes. Oh, you're chairing. No.
To answer your own question.
Not yet. No, so I have enormous pleasure. And really, I cannot think of anyone in the world I'd rather introduce than Bishop Michael Nazir Ali. Oliver's already mentioned a little bit about why we have such respect for Bishop Michael Nazir Ali. And I think you are so well known. And I just love it when you speak, because I just know I'm going to be reassured, because I'm going to hear the truth spoken. We know only the truth will make us free. Bishop Michael Nazir Ali. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that was a very good way of getting out of questions.
I think they're coming at the end.
Well, it gives me a little bit of time. Thank you very much, Caroline, and we so applaud your courage and your pioneering work, really, that you have done, particularly with the Sudan. I was with 5 of the Anglican bishops from the north of the Sudan, and they were saying exactly what you have said. So speaking the truth is very important at this time in our situation. You may remember last year a poor Pakistani peasant woman called Asia Bibi. She was being pressurized by her colleagues at work to convert to Islam. And after some time, she was goaded into saying something like, "My Jesus has died for me. What has your prophet done for you?" For saying this, she was arrested, arrested, tried for blasphemy, and sentenced to death by hanging. She's still in prison. Immediately after her sentencing, and this is the point of the story, Salman Taseer, a very enlightened governor of the Punjab province, went to see her. And when he emerged from her cell, he said that it was iniquitous that something like this should happen, and that the government, his government, because he is a member of the present ruling party, they must somehow amend the blasphemy law in Pakistan to prevent this kind of thing happening again. For saying this, a few days later, Salman Taseer was murdered by his own guard. And a few weeks later, the only Pakistani Christian cabinet minister, Shahbaz Bhatti, was also killed. I was talking to a senior government minister in Pakistan at that time, a moderate Muslim, a highly respected man, and a close friend of mine. And he said that what worried him about the Salman Taseer murder was the tacit approval of the middle classes in Pakistan. Now, I don't ever want to contradict Caroline, and I don't think I am, but the fact of the matter is, increasingly now, in Egypt, in Pakistan, in a number of countries, that we are not talking about a small group of extremists at one end of the spectrum. We are not, I mean, that may have been the case at one time. We are now talking about a resurgence of this kind, which is quite widespread in the population. I was once going around the villages in Lower Egypt. I never know which is lower and which is upper in Egypt. Things are the wrong way around, aren't they? As I went around the villages, as soon as they heard that I was from Pakistan, the only question in the shops that people were interested in asking me were about Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. What you might call radicalization of populations has occurred, first of all, because of a teaching of hate in the textbooks, which children have to learn in school, whether it's history or social studies or religious studies, a number of areas. It has been reinforced by extremist preachers from the mosques, who in turn are trained in radicalized madrasas. So there is a whole network that is radicalizing populations, and I don't think we should be complacent about it. Now, of course, even to be a radical Islamist Muslim does not necessarily make you violent, nor does pietism. There are pietistic movements that are also radicalized, but not necessarily violent. However, exposure to this kind of thinking and teaching and membership of these movements has been shown to lead people to violence. I think that's something to remember. The agenda that radical Islamists have, of the Sunni variety, I mean the Shia variety I can talk about later if you wish, but of the Sunni variety, there is first of all the restoration of the caliphate. This is really to do with the desire for theocracy, and is tied up with what you might call a pan-Islamic agenda. That is to say, nation-states are in themselves ultimately un-Islamic, and they must be replaced eventually by the world ummah, the world Muslim community, of which the caliph would be head. There is then the recovery of lands lost to Islam. Caroline mentioned Israel-Palestine just now, and one of the features of that conflict has to do with the inability of people to accept that certain lands that were once ruled by Muslims may no longer be. And when you think about such lands, there is India. What happens there? The Iberian Peninsula. I mean, there are so many examples we can give. And the fourth, of course, is the implementation of Sharia, understood in the way that Islamist extremists understand it. Now, there are many features, of course, to Sharia. It is an all-encompassing, a comprehensive law that affects every area of a Muslim's life and of the life of a Muslim community. There is no area that is left out, and we've had already quite a lot said about Muslim women under Sharia law. A Muslim scholar himself has pointed out that there are three great inequalities in Sharia. There is the inequality between men and women. Caroline's mentioned that already. There's the inequality between Muslim and non-Muslim, which I will come to in a moment. And there was, of course, the inequality between slaves and free. If we look, for instance, at family law, because those people who were suggesting that Sharia law in some form might be recognized in terms of British public law, put forward family law as the acceptable face of Sharia. But even if you do that, Caroline has shown comprehensively how that militates against justice and freedom for women, but also for children. There is no way in which justice can be provided for women and young children under that system of law. In fact, many Muslim countries have themselves amended their laws to take account of the injustice that may occur. From 1961, Pakistan has had something called the Family Laws Ordinance, which seeks to limit the impact of Sharia on women and children. And it has consistently been opposed by the ulama, by the mullahs. Why? There is the question about the treatment of children. At the moment, the government of Pakistan is trying to implement a United Nations resolution that asks for the age of criminality to be raised to, I think it's 12. This is being opposed by its own interior ministry, relying on Sharia, saying that puberty occurs when certain physical things happen to boys and girls. Now, if this is actually the basis for law in a country like Pakistan, what you will have and what will never end is things like child marriage. Because as soon as a girl begins her periods and so forth, she's then eligible for marriage. So how are you going to have a minimum age for marriage? Sharia affects the ways in which people worship, what they wear, what they eat, how they behave in public, all of those things, and all of these have implications for us today. But I would like to concentrate on, for example, Sharia penal law. Caroline mentioned the question of rape, that if a Muslim, or if any woman in a Sharia respecting country, if a woman reports rape to the police, she must produce 4 Muslim men who are of sound mind as witnesses. Now, that's bad enough, but failure to do it might result in this woman herself being accused of fornication or adultery, and therefore of the penalties that apply to it. So, if a Christian woman is raped, I mean that has happened in many countries, how is she going to produce this evidence? And if she doesn't, what will happen to her? The penal laws also prescribe harsh punishments for drinking alcohol, for adultery, and for many other crimes. Punishments that shock the world, of course, when they are implemented on the streets in terms of public executions and whippings and lashings and amputations. Then, how Sharia actually applies to non-Muslims. The Sharia and Islam generally reduces non-Muslims living in an Islamic polity to the status of dhimmi. That is to say, people who may be tolerated to live in an Islamic country but under severe disabilities, where their places of worship are concerned, where their freedom of speech is concerned, sometimes even their ability to worship. Now, we may be able to understand being a dhimmi, to understand the dhimma historically, but the fact of the matter is this is not just a historical nicety. There are many countries today, and Sudan, North Sudan now perhaps we should call it, is certainly one of them, where the dhimma is being reintroduced. So Christians and other non-Muslims will no longer be citizens alongside their Muslim fellow citizens, but something else. And the plight of non-Muslims in many Islamic countries certainly should give us pause for thought. This has happened in the last 40 years. Before then, there was hardly any Muslim country that did not give its non-Muslims equal rights, at least on paper. The whole movement towards equalization has actively been reversed in Iran, in Pakistan, in the Sudan, and my fear these days is about Egypt. What will happen there? In addition to this, there is the question of Sharia and Muslims living in non-Muslim polities. Traditionally, if a Muslim found himself or herself in a non-Muslim country, a country ruled by non-Muslims, the injunction was to emigrate immediately. However, over the course of history, that was not surprisingly regarded as impractical. And so certain caveats were introduced. So people could stay in a country like that, provided they could observe Sharia. And provided they could have their own judges that ensured the observance of Sharia. So what we are seeing these days, in the way that you have told us about, Caroline, is a way of accommodation that Muslims are attempting in line with Sharia. I mean, they must do this. We, of course, have to uphold the autonomy and the independence of British public law for reasons that you have quite clearly explained. But this is the reason. I mean, this is a big question. I suppose there are two big questions. How do non-Muslims live in Muslim polities? What freedom they have? And the other is, how do Muslims live in non-Muslim countries where the majority is not Muslim? As far as the first is concerned, the test case really is Egypt, I think. Democracy is never enough. The Western press has been quite misled, I believe, about the so-called Arab Spring. It has never been a secular movement. The secular people have taken part in it, but it's not secular. It is Islamist-led, Islamists of different kinds. I do acknowledge that. And Tahrir Square in Cairo, when I first saw it, immediately reminded me of Tehran in 1979, where again there was a broadly based coalition wanting to remove the Shah. That was the only thing that united them. As soon as the Shah was removed, the mullahs then got rid of all their erstwhile allies. But given what's happened, and we can now see that even Tunisia was not a secular event, democracy is never enough. What needs to happen in Egypt and perhaps other countries as well is the recognition of the equality of all before the law. You mentioned that just now. This is very important, whether it's in terms of a Bill of Rights or in some other way, I don't know. But that must happen if the very large Christian population is to be safeguarded. We are just thinking these days about the untimely death, I think, of Pope Shenouda. But what a courageous man he was in standing up to the pressure for so many years from 1971 onwards. There must be a commitment to a common citizenship. That is to say, the dhimma in any form is not acceptable. Equality of all before the law, one law for all, a common citizenship, and then we will see what advantages democracy has to bring to a country like Egypt. Now, just to finish, it is true that in many Muslim countries, in the business of making law, Sharia is taken into account. So in Egypt for a very long time, Sharia was regarded constitutionally as one of the sources of law. But under Sadat, it was changed to the only source of law, the one source of law. And that, of course, is the problem. Well, it is one problem. The other problem is that throughout Islamic history, there have been ways of understanding Sharia which have limited the sort of impact that Caroline was talking about. I mean, there are traditions that have allowed movement and flexibility in terms of Sharia itself. As far as the first is concerned, about being one source of law, Sharia itself recognizes that there are other things that need to be taken into account, like custom, for instance. Sir Norman Anderson, who was a great Islamic scholar and also a great evangelical Christian, used to say that in the early part of the 20th century, Islamic scholars themselves were engaging in what he called talfiq, that is to say, patching Sharia law with modern Western law to meet contemporary needs. But of course, those who are in the ascendancy now don't allow for custom. They don't allow for talfiq or for a patching of the law. They want Sharia as understood in its narrowest possible way. And so, looking secondly at principles of movement in Sharia, these people are not interested in such principles of movement within the existing schools of law, and they're certainly not interested in the appeal for a radical revision of Sharia that has also been made on many occasions by many Islamic scholars. I've mentioned blasphemy, of course, but I should also, before I sit down, mention the law of apostasy. When we were campaigning for the release of Mr. Abdur Rahman, the man who was sentenced to death in Afghanistan for converting to Christianity, I was with a friend of mine, Professor Kamali, who is a constitutional expert from Afghanistan, and I said to him, look, the international community has provided so many troops and so much money to make sure that Afghanistan does not once again fall into the hands of the Taliban. You have been one of the compilers of the new Afghan constitution. How can this happen under this constitution that you have helped to compile? And he said to me, Michael, we have done our best. We've done our best. We have even included the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights into the preamble of the new Afghan constitution. But, he said, whatever we may do anywhere, I think he said, Sharia will always trump any constitution. Now, this is not me saying this is a prominent Islamic constitutional lawyer saying this. Apostasy is punishable traditionally by death, as is blasphemy, of course. And another friend of mine, Sheikh Ali Goma, the Grand Mufti of Egypt, 3 years ago, introduced a fatwa in which he tried to say that apostasy should not be punishable in this life in Islam. This was so vigorously resisted by the ulama throughout the Muslim world that the poor man had to retract most of what he said. The Iranian parliament, again only a few years ago, passed a law prescribing the death penalty for apostasy. Happily, for procedural reasons, the law could not get onto the statute books. But judges in Iran habitually use Sharia law to convict people of apostasy even though there is no statutory law. This is the kind of situation that we face, that whatever the system of law, whatever the constitution, Sharia law in certain areas regarding women, regarding marriage, divorce, custody of children, apostasy and blasphemy can still be used by judges to limit freedom of speech, freedom of belief, freedom to change one's belief. I think there is the outward looking when we look at the world outside and see what is happening to our brothers and sisters, but not only to them. I mean, when I look at Iran, I look at my Christian brothers and sisters and pray for them and serve them, but I'm also aware, how can I not be, of what is happening to the Baha'i community there. Similarly, in Pakistan, of course, I am concerned about Asia Bibi and Christians like her who've been accused of blasphemy, but I'm also aware of the Ahmadiyya community and the suffering they are undergoing. We must look outwards, but we must also look to our own situation here in this country. Public law must, of course, respect the conscience of religious believers. But at the same time, it would be a great mistake to recognize Sharia in terms of public law in this country, because the very principles of Sharia, as I have said, contradict the foundational principles of public law as it has emerged from the Judeo-Christian tradition in this country. So thank you very much indeed. I look forward to the discussion later on.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Bishop Michael. That was as authoritative, fascinating, comprehensive and challenging as I knew it would be. Thank you. Just you can relax a little bit from my questions are not due until after we've heard from the Vicar of Baghdad, Canon Andrew White.
Good evening. Welcome to a little presentation or talk that I seen that Islamic ideology or a methodology of government has been increasing rapidly. We have seen so much happen with the so-called Islamic Spring, and yet the fact is that nothing has changed apart from each nation becoming more Islamic. As we look at in Iraq, supposedly it's a democratic country, but democracy was dropped from the sky upon Iraq. And the fact is that it has become increasingly a religious society. And when religion goes wrong, as Archbishop William Temple said, it goes very wrong. So we have seen religion becoming increasingly fundamentalist. And we have seen a rise in Sharia, or the desire to have Islamic law. So even a nation which is supposedly democratic, increasingly the legal position of the land is totally in line with Sharia. Now the problem is that this actually allows a lot less freedom for those other ideologies and other religions. The Christians in Iraq will talk about the Arab Spring or the Awakening simply as the Arab thing. Others will talk about it as the Arab Winter, because for them, as Islamic groups like the Muslim Brotherhood and various other Salafi and Wahhabi groups that control, their actual freedoms have been greatly diminished. And now they don't feel that they've got governmental response to enable their liberty. In Iraq, we are very fortunate that at no time has the government done anything which is against Christians. In fact, it has actually helped us. And even the Sharia aspects of the law which are brought in are not used against the Christian. But in places like Egypt, which is one of the largest Christian communities, with 10% of the nation being Copts, you cannot say the same. There is increasingly a fear about the Islamic law which is being brought into play and is increasingly Sharia law. And so even Sharia on its own might not be dangerous. The fact is that the kind of people who want to introduce, and for what they want it introduced, it is increasingly dangerous. It minimises the role of the Christians in the region. It makes those who are a significant minority feel as if they are nothing. It makes them feel that they are not wanted and that their right to protection and future is now greyed out. They have no place because there is no law or position which you can say is Christian law. But there in the Middle East, we're seeing that anything which is perceived to be Western is referred to as being Christian. And so there's total and utter confusion. We continue, we do not give in, but things are so difficult for us here in the Middle East. Thank you very much.
We are going to link to that video on our website, so I'll send you the link.
Thank you. Well, it was nice to have given him applause in absentia, and I'm sure you will let him know how much we appreciated his message and the courage of staying there, holding that front line of faith and freedom in Baghdad, but also with his health situation as well. A formidable, wonderful Christian leader, and so wise. I think Paul Diamond, unless I'm missing something,
I think he's got lost.
Has not joined us, which means that we will, I think, go into Q&A, if that's right with you. And your comments. There needn't be questions, but can I just give advance notice that we will need to be out of the room just after 20 past, because there will be people coming in and they need time to sort of, change the room, the committee room, and make it appropriate for the next people coming in. So we will be finishing at 5:20. So speak now or forever hold your peace. You won't get a chance after 5:20. Thank you. And Andrew, I think you're only going to chair this.
Can you lead the Q&A?
Sorry, would you like to be introduced, Andrew?
Thank you, Caroline. That would be kind.
I think, may I introduce Andrew Boyd, for whom I have again unbounded respect as a very well respected author, commentator, journalist, and a wonderful.
And also, I'll talk about you.
Well, I wasn't going to mention that. But also a freedom fighter in the world of ideas and media.
Thank you, Lady
It's a privilege to be here with you.
Thank you. Thank you likewise. I'm a trustee of CBC. Oliver's asked me to chair questions. If you have questions, please, could you say who you are and if you represent an organisation, say which organisation it is, and make your question. But I'm going to cheat because I have a position here where I can. I'm going to ask the first, please, of you, Lady Cox. Some would say that it would be possible to introduce a moderate form of Sharia law into the UK without the excesses of stoning and cross-amputation, without the extremes of medieval Islam. In fact, many who are advocating that would see that that was the way ahead, and many others would see it as being a tolerant response from a very tolerant nation to allow Muslims to regulate themselves in that way. Is it possible to introduce a moderate form of Sharia law here?
Thank you. I think Bishop Michael is far better placed to answer that than I am. But as I see what I see and I respond to that to which I respond, and as I understand it, I'm dealing with the issue of gender discrimination because that is inherent and that is what is causing suffering for women in this country. And I think I'm fairly well known to be concerned for human rights and injustice in other countries, and I can't be concerned for the child soldiers and the slavery in Burma or the sufferings in Sudan and ignore the suffering in my own country. But I think what one is doing by highlighting the women who really are suffering in this country as a result of the inherent provision, I think, in any form of Sharia law, against women. One is highlighting their predicament, and I can't sit here and condone their suffering without saying something about it, but also highlighting the very nature of that aspect of Sharia law, which is endemic, inherent, and I don't think it can be modified without actually modifying Sharia law, which, as Bishop Michael has said so eloquently, is something that will be strongly resisted by traditionalists and by orthodox Islamic theologians. Is that fair? Mm. So I think one is getting to the heart of the matter of Sharia law by highlighting the aspect as it impacts on women. We do not at the moment have the brutal punishments. There are those in this country who say they would like to bring them in, but I think at the moment we've got to draw a line in the sand now where we are at, because it's already unacceptable in terms of our liberal democracy, in terms of gender discrimination, and in terms of having a quasi-parallel legal system, which should not be allowed in this country. But I'll now defer to the expert to say whether I said what was appropriate and what we would like to add.
Michael, would you like to comment on that?
Well, if the chairman will comment.
Oh, absolutely. Please.
Yes, I think the last phrase is the operative one. It's about whether there should be a parallel legal system. And the answer to that is, regardless of how moderate it may appear to be, the answer must be no, because the system actually works on principles, as I've pointed out, that directly contradict the basic principles of British public law. I mean, I think that's the reason. I mean, there is also the question about where you go with the logic. As I was saying, the logic will not stop at recognition of Sharia in terms of public law. It will then demand its own courts, its own judges, its own legal system, and this means that a considerable number of our fellow citizens will not have the protection of British public law. This is not something that we should desire. In the end, Sharia will have to be implemented by people well versed in Sharia. I mean, this is the point. And the people who are well versed in Sharia, the experts, for instance, regularly consulted by our government on Sharia finance. You see, there are experts, there are very few of them. There are experts in Sharia finance, but many of them also operate in other areas, and some of them certainly hold views about punishments that would cause us great concern in this country.
Thank you. Please.
Norman Fisher. I'm not in broadcasting, but I am a retired academic university professor. Could I ask Bishop Michael a question, please? It's about the rivalry between the Sunnis, say perhaps led by Saudi Arabia, and the Shias, possibly led by Iran, where that will go, and the complication of a nuclear Pakistan.
In that
it makes Iran even more nervous.
Well, it makes many Pakistanis very nervous.
Sure.
But yes, thank you. I mean, may I answer that, Andrew?
Yeah.
I come from a Shia family, so this is an insider's view, if you like. I mean, one of the problems about the Shia has been that the world has consistently underestimated the numbers of Shia that there are. This is partly because of the way in which taqiyya works, so that the Shia do not declare themselves Shia, at least some Shia don't, until there are favourable circumstances for them to do so. We were watching Andrew White in Iraq. I was with him last year. And I often wondered as I was driving through the streets of Baghdad, how many people before the Second Iraqi War knew that the majority of Iraq was Shia? How many? The fault line runs right across the Islamic world. You mentioned Saudi. There is a very significant Shia population in Saudi, but how significant? Is it as significant, for example, as Bahrain? And you will never know until it's almost too late. I've been told reliably that about 30% of the population of Turkey is Shia. Now, that's not a country you think of in those terms. So there is going to be a Shia arc, if you like, meeting a Sunni arc. What has happened in Iran, which has now had implications also in Lebanon and elsewhere, Bahrain and Saudi, is an activist interpretation of Shiism, which has been revived quite recently, particularly by Khomeini himself. Now, there are leading Shia thinkers in Iran and Iraq who do not agree with this way of looking at Shia destiny, who are what we might call quietistic, who do not believe that religious leaders should intervene in politics in this way, but should be moral and spiritual leaders and so on. I am in touch with many of them. And the question, I suppose, in the end is who will win that particular debate within Shiism. At the moment, it is the Wilayat-e-Faqih school, which believes in activism, that is winning the debate. And the result of that has been, apart from Saudi and Bahrain and so forth, that, the fact of the matter is this, that Iran by proxy has an army waiting within 40 miles of Armageddon. That's the literal truth in the form of Hezbollah.
Andrew?
Thank you. I'd like to give a little space for questions from the press. Hazel?
Hazel Southern from The Sun. I have a question each, if that's okay.
Can you stand up and speak a little louder?
I can stand up, but
We'll just
can't
speak a bit louder. It's difficult to hear.
Bishop, how real a threat is the idea of stoning and whipping and lashing in the UK?
Well, I don't know. What I can say is this, that if you had said to me in the mid-70s that these punishments would be meted out on the streets of Tehran, I would not have believed you. If you had said to me in 1980 that these punishments would be meted out as a matter of course in the streets of the cities in Pakistan, I would not have believed you. How soon will it be that something like this happens in Egypt, for instance? I really don't know the answer. 2 or 3 years ago I would have said it's very unlikely that hudud punishments, as they are called, would happen in a country like Egypt. But now I don't know. However, the question for me is not that, really. It is not... that is the extreme sort of aspect of Sharia. What worries me about Sharia is the way in which Muslims relate to non-Muslims, whether they wish to or not. It's separate electorates. Pakistan exists as a country because the Muslims of India could not accept a common electorate with everyone else. Now, we've had a Muslim parliament here, for some time. Under Sharia law, Muslims are bound to ask. They're bound to ask, if they stay, for their own system. Now, this is the point about common citizenship and one law for all and things like that. Should we be encouraging something that doesn't work towards integration, common citizenship, finding ways of living together? In terms of the political process, the judicial process, even finance, the big banks say that they are making Sharia-compliant mortgages available. Okay, nobody can make much of an objection to that. But it doesn't stop there. See, the question is, where does the capital come from to make those mortgages available? Does that capital come also from interest-free activity or not? And if it doesn't, how is it generated? Is the capital generated also generated by interest-free activity, in which who then decides whether it is or not? So before you know it, you've got a segregated financial system, which is then adjudicated by people who are experts in this area. Well, who else can do it? I mean, other people can't do it. They don't have the knowledge. They don't have the expertise. I mean, in terms of Islamic finance, there are many Muslim resources that prevent us going that way. Muhammad Abduh, the Grand Mufti of Egypt at the turn of the last century, said bank interest is not riba, it's not usury. The same thing has been repeated by Al-Azhar in Cairo. The government of Pakistan has taken itself to court on this matter, because some time ago it declared that all bank interest is riba. It then discovered that this cut its own financial transactions off from the international markets. So it has now gone to court to enable it to engage in international transactions where there is interest-bearing economic activity. So I think the question is not about stonings and amputations and so on. The question...
That's my question. Are you saying that you could imagine that happening one day in Britain?
I can't say about Britain, but what I can say is that many places where I could not imagine it happening, it has happened.
Okay.
Lady Cox, would you like to reply to that question?
No, I think it's a separate question.
It's a slightly different follow-up.
Different question.
If I can. Baroness Cox, when does your bill come back before Parliament, and are you expecting it to succeed?
Thank you. I dated it what we call this first reading, second reading committee and so on. And I had the first reading in June of last year. And there were already a lot of bills ahead of this. And then as it got nearer the end of this Parliament, I was advised by a lot of peers support the bill, by sort of senior peers who do support the bill. They said, look, don't try and rush it into this Parliament. It would be much better to bring it back at the beginning of the next Parliament, and so immediately after the state opening, I should try and get the first reading. But this time I will really move for a second reading very, very quickly, as quick as I can. So I hope it'll be in the not too distant future. And I was prepared to let it take its time, because I wanted that interim time to build support, because I've got so much support both amongst peers from all parts of the House and then from groups outside Parliament, like the Muslim groups Inspire. So building support, so in a much better position now when we have our second reading debate. I think it should be a very informative second reading debate, and I hope it'll be in the relatively early stages of the new Parliament.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any more representatives of the press here? Yes, please.
Colin Gordon-Farley from The Voice Christian News and Views. An observation that studies have shown that where the percentage of Muslims in a country increases, even by as little as 0.5%, so the increase towards Islamification within that country increases accordingly. And so if we talk about moderate Muslims in the one breath, and then we look at what is actually happening in countries where there is an increase in the Muslim population of the countries, the two, in fact, don't marry up together. And I believe that whilst it's fallacious to say that every Muslim is a terrorist, it's not so to say that pretty well every terrorist is a Muslim. And so we need to, I think, temper very carefully before we allow any form of Sharia to be officially recognised within this country. Thank you.
I would ask you please to put questions rather than statements. And could we also make sure that they do address the issue of Sharia law, please?
Benedict Parsons, and media and human rights consultant. With the redefinition of marriage, do you think there's a significant danger that could end up becoming the thin end of the wedge for other relationship forms such as polygamy being formally recognised here in the UK? That, I think, initially to Bishop Michael, but perhaps Baroness, if you would mind feeding on that.
Already. Yeah.
Well, but I mean, I think this is already...
It's already. It is already.
Yes, it is already happening in terms of social services,
family law,
and benefits being made available and so forth. But it's also happening theoretically, because if you look at Anthony Giddens' free relationships idea, I mean, there is no reason why such consensual adult relationships should be limited to two people. I mean, I don't see, if you redefine marriage in any way, I don't see what intellectual barrier there would be then to other kinds of consensual, non-coercive adult relationships.
So I think just to put that back in the Sharia law context, I think one of the ways of trying to draw the line in the sand is to show how this actually impacts even now, it's already happening de facto, if not de jure, how it impacts adversely on women and children. So you have to begin to draw a line in the sand in terms of the reality, what's happening in the present time, and unacceptable that reality is. But at the moment, we have this utterly unacceptable situation, goes back to the point that Bishop Michael has made, that we have two parallel legal systems. We have a legal system which doesn't permit bigamy, it's against the law. We have a legal system which is allowing polygamy, and it's happening in this country against the law. So the sort of discrepancies, the injustices are there, and now is the time to actually highlight them before they get any more entrenched.
You had your hand up earlier.
Yes, the question I would like to ask is does the present situation prevail upon us because we, as Christians, have not done our part effectively in the past?
Identify yourself, sorry for the record.
Quite right.
Sorry?
Please say who you are.
Oh yes, my name, David Crowter of Christian Watch.
Who would like to take that? Would you?
I mean, I'd like that elaborated a bit in what not done our part in what area.
Yes. The scriptures tell us, I think it's Paul the Apostle, that we should contend earnestly for the faith once delivered. And these things are gradually being imposed upon us, while the majority of Christians are silent. And we see the effect of it coming increasingly. I have a lot of offspring, grandchildren, great-grandchildren as well, and I wonder what is before them, quite honestly, because so many who profess to be Christians are silent and they just allow these things to happen.
Yes, and I think this is where you can't blame Islam or Muslims. I think you've identified the basic problem, which is the abandoning of a moral and spiritual framework by the society, which it has had for many years, for centuries, supplied by the Bible, by the Judeo-Christian tradition. Now, if you do that, you create a vacuum, and in fact, that is what we are living in now. Policies and even legislation are brought about not by an appeal to a spiritual and moral tradition, but by public opinion poll, focus groups, and what I call the yuck factor, which is what is acceptable to the public at any given time. Now, this means things can change radically. What is acceptable today, 5 years later, will be unacceptable, and vice versa. As I have said in writing on many occasions, the right way for this country to have dealt with the new diversity that there is would have been Christian hospitality. Instead of which, because the country was losing its Christian discourse, its Christian way of thinking and doing, things like multiculturalism were invented, which basically said, we don't know who we are. We certainly don't know who you are. So let us live our lives as we've always done. The elite who said this were unaffected largely by the new diversity. And what it meant in the end was isolated, segregated communities with nothing to do with one another, no common view of citizenship or of national life. And this was used by extremists to penetrate these communities and to influence them. Now, if radical Islamist extremists have penetrated one kind of isolated communities, the far right, as you mentioned, has penetrated other communities. But this was a failure of vision of Christian hospitality that would have led to a diverse society that was nevertheless integrated under a biblical Judeo-Christian vision for society and its welfare, its good.
Can I just add, I'm just picking up Bishop Michael's point on multiculturalism, and I think that really is such an insidious thing. And can I recommend to anybody here, if you haven't seen it, this superb play, it's on at the National Theatre, the Littleton Theatre, Can We Talk About This? Yana and I went to it last Tuesday, and it really says so much of what we're talking about today with courage. It really does not mince its words. And you don't often get a programme for theatre, the National Theatre, and in the programme notes, if I may just briefly quote, and it said, and the UN has recently adopted a motion calling of all religious, to enact a law to outlaw any criticism of Islam. We should resist these illiberal moves robustly. We honour our servicemen and servicewomen, not only by wearing a poppy with pride, we do so by defending the freedoms for which they died. Now, that's in the programme notes. And this is all about Sharia law, about multiculturalism, about extreme relativism, and the need to defend our freedoms. So please, we've not gone to it. Please try to go to it. I'm happy to say when we went, it was a full house, and it was very, very warmly welcomed with a semi-standing ovation. But it is a play that has the courage to tell it how it is, so recommend it. And if you can, see it or recommend other people to go to it. It is a courageous play that deals with all the issues we're talking about with great courage.
Good. Oh, lots and lots of hands. Okay, yours was up a while ago.
Thank you very much. Tim Vince at Moghanger Park. Education. There's a revolution taking place with the academies and the proliferation of Islamic schools, among others. Do you see that as an opportunity to put the brakes on Sharia education within some of these schools and for greater scrutiny?
I begin by answering that. Two answers to that. One is it's a chance to develop a lot of good Christian schools, and I know I'm privileged to be associated with some of the very good Christian academies, like one of the very first ones up in Gateshead. So there is an opportunity here to make sure we do have schools where our faith is taught sensitively and very soundly.
Because there's great scrutiny of Christian schools.
Yes, exactly, but, there's a big but. As I mentioned very briefly, I don't know if you saw the Dispatches programme, the undercover programme of the madrasa. What was particularly worrying about that is it did show that school teaching really virulent anti-Semitism, anti-Christian, anti-other faiths, and also in the sort of recreation time, horrendous bullying and abuse of younger kids by older kids. So that was a school which really should not have passed any Ofsted examination. And as I understand it, but don't quote me because I need to check it, but I think that school got a very high rating from Ofsted, above all things for tolerance. So it does mean that we must make sure that if we do have faith schools, they're all equally subject to rigorous assessment, both in terms of the curriculum that they teach and also the values, and particularly the values regarding sort of tolerance, respect and care for other kids. So it's an opportunity, but it should be one way of bringing the madrasas or the other faith schools into line with best practice and the fundamental values of our country, and not allowing them to teach their hate and to use abuse as part of what was obviously going on in that school. The other interesting thing about that school was that Channel 4, I think it was, were actually sued by the police for what they did, and they got into trouble for exposing it. Subsequently, I understand the police have actually had to pay them a cost for libel. But we do need to watch for what goes on in those schools. Opportunities, yes, but at the moment being abused. I remind you, we've got another 8 minutes or so to go.
Yes, I'm just looking at the back. There were lots of hands up earlier. Okay. Donald, you had your hand up a while ago.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Donald Burning, CBC trustee. It's come to me. I've noted that the one person who's asserted that the Conservative Party does do God is Baroness Barsi, who's a Muslim. Yes. It's also noted the only person I can remember on the Radio 4 Thought for the Day who's mentioned life after death seems to be Mona Siddiqui, who's also a Muslim. I just wanted to bear in mind that do we have to be careful lest the real concern about the injustices of Sharia law and the dangers of its having an undue place in our own legal system, that lest we begin to sort of take the side of the secularists who are really almost using Islam as using their equalities outlook as almost as an attack on Christianity.
Lady Cox, would you like to take that, because you have support from the Secular Society and others?
When I first came to politics, and I wasn't really a politician, I had everything to learn, very good advice from Rhodes Boyson at the time, Minister of Education, who said, if you can work with someone on something you share those values, then it doesn't matter if you don't share a lot of their other values, you work together with allies where you can find them, provided that it's with integrity on that subject. And when we were fighting the incitement to religious hatred legislation, we had a very broad coalition of support, both across the political parties, but also people who support us out there in the big world out there. And they included the National Secular Society, also included Mr. Bean, Rowan Williams, who came and spoke, and he wasn't the least bit funny when he came to speak. He was deadly serious, we hardly recognised him. We also had the support of the Ahmadiyya Muslims. So you don't have to agree with someone on everything, to fight a battle on something where you agree genuinely with integrity on the issues concerned. So on the bill relating to the Sharia law and the gender discrimination, yes, we have very strong support for the National Secular Society, the One Law for All campaign. We share those values on one law for all. It's a fundamental value. If you share that, well, then you share that platform with those people. And similarly, Muslims for secular democracy. I mean, they're Muslim friends, but they're for a secular democracy. So where you can share with integrity, you broaden the base of your support. You don't have to agree with everyone about everything to fight a campaign.
We have 3 minutes left.
Could I say something about this? This is an important question. I think the point is this, that public law in the West generally developed out of Christianized Roman law and the canon law of the Church. So it has a demonstrably Judeo-Christian basis. Nevertheless, it has acquired a certain autonomy from every religious community. So we should respect that autonomy. I think it's also true that the law should respect conscience. I mean, I've said that throughout. Every religious community in such a situation will be able to live its own life freely. So if Muslims want to practice Sharia within their religious community, they should be free to do so, of course. That's part of their religious belief. That is not the question before us. The question before us is whether Sharia should be recognized in terms of public law in this country. And that is where we have taken the stand that it should not be, because its principles contradict the basic principles of British and indeed more generally Western public law. I think that's the issue.
Okay. We are very short of time. I will take one very brief question from this lady here, because you were asking a while ago. Yes.
Oh, thank you. Whilst I think we've had a lot of evidence.
Sally.
Sorry, Sally Rickard. Whilst we've had a lot of evidence of the escalation of Sharia law's influences around the world, can we ignore the very delicate issues that we are facing in this nation at so many levels, and how much can we therefore embrace the diversity of the, if you like, of the overspill of Sharia in terms of the financial system, which is so grave, which, who knows, but even before Lady Cox is able to bring her bill again, may dramatically change. Can you have any response to how you believe that the body of Christ, the Judeo-Christian heritage of this nation, can be resurrected? That means Jew and Christian coming together once again. It has to happen. It's in the Word of God. And I think it's a word that very often gets missed out of many, many Christian discussions. We sometimes mention it, but not often enough. That is the heritage we have lost. And that's why we're facing Sharia. And we have to wake up very, very seriously and immediately.
We need to put that question. So, briefly, can you see a coming together? Is there a need for a coming together of those who would embrace the Judeo-Christian traditions to stand against what might be perceived as a threat by Sharia law? Bishop Michael.
Yes, I was asked by Tariq Ramadan in a public debate in Oxford why I kept referring to the Judeo-Christian tradition and not to Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, for instance. And I said, well, the answer actually is quite simple. It is that we share the Bible with the Jewish people. We don't share a common book with Muslims, however much there may be in common. And that's why it is right to refer to the Judeo-Christian tradition. Much of what I say in what I have said this afternoon has come from the Older Testament, for example. I think where the overspill question is concerned, I mean, I've written extensively on the finance question, and you can read it there. The danger is not in offering Sharia-compliant products to people. That may be okay, but where the logic of this will lead us, because I think if you start offering Sharia-compliant products, in the end, the logic will lead us to how capital is generated and therefore how financial institutions work, and then also, of course, their regulation and the settlement of disputes.
Thank you. I'm sorry if I've missed you out. Our time is up, but thank you so much for your contributions. Lady Cox.
No, well, thank you all very much for coming, caring enough to come. Much appreciated. Can I just ask, I know there's a lady from The Sun here. Is there anyone else from the national media here? Because Olive did say that Bishop Michael, I might be available if you wanted a word with us from the national media. But if you wanted an extra question, you're more than welcome. The television interview was kept for that purpose. But in the meantime, I'm afraid we do need to be out because they need to prepare the room for the next meeting. But Olive, thank you so much for having, as you always do, the vision to call a meeting on such an important subject. And Michael, thank you as always for being as inspirational and informative as you always are. Before you go, can I just draw your attention, if anyone has any doubt about the importance of these particular measures, and please would you write to your MPs to support this bill, if you are interested in it and feel able so to do. If you have not yet read it, the book The Imam's Daughter by Hannah Shah is a true story. I know the person who ghost-wrote it. He is an extremely good author, and I would trust him. He's an author of great integrity, like Alan Boyd, an author of great integrity. But the person who wrote it, his name is not on it, and this shows the level of intimidation in our country, because his family did not want his name on it because they feared reprisals. And the very brave girl who allowed her story to be told in great detail, and it is a true story, and I think Sir Michael will endorse the truth of the story, she is still on the run in this country today. Now, we should have people living in terror in this country today. The Imam's Daughter by Hannah Shah, S-H-A-H, that of course is a pseudonym, and it was published by I've got my glasses on rider. So do please read that. It'll give you an insight into what I'm afraid is just one story among countless stories of that kind in our country today. We have to do something.